Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and I welcome you all to this webinar session. This is a fourth in our ESG series themed Leading the Way in Sustainable Businesses. My name is Emma Amokupari, an assistant manager with KPMG Ghana. I'm with the Financial Risk Management Unit. My expertise span across sustainability and climate risk, and I've had the privilege of serving as a business advisor and project lead across various risk management engagements. These have included implementing enterprise risk management frameworks, developing credit risk models, assessing ESG risk, and supporting sustainability reporting. Our series continues to deliver essential sessions on risk transformation and ESG strategy. And so today I'm looking forward to be able to share with you and also understanding through the sessions with our panel speaker, what it means to mitigate and manage ESG risk. The challenges we face are quite significant. Climate change that threatens livelihoods, social inequalities that demand attention, and an evolving regulatory environment. But these challenges also present opportunities. So in our discussion today, I'm looking forward to a very exciting, interactive, and engaging session with you all. I would like to introduce our speaker for today, because we will not simply talk about effective risk management. We will decode the intricate and sometimes daunting world of ESG and explore how businesses, both large and small, can transform these global challenges into engines of growth, innovation, and long-term value. Our speaker, Bernard Owusu-Ansah, is a manager with KPMG Ghana's Governance, Risk, and Compliance Services. Bernard has 5 years experience in various GRC services lines, including risk management, internal controls, and ESG advisory services. He has served as a business advisor and field lead on various engagements and trainings, including the provision of sustainability reporting services, internal audits, program appraisals, and monitoring and evaluation services. He has facilitated various modules across corporate governance, ESG reporting, and integration strategies on behalf of the National Banking College for several banks and financial institutions in Ghana. But before we welcome Bernard, we would like to engage in a brief interactive exercise. As we know, effective risk management is largely driven by professionals assigned with the responsibility of risk across the various industries. So to enhance our understanding of our audience today, let us know your current roles and the sectors in which your businesses operate. So please take a moment to engage with our session poll by scanning the provided QR code, which will facilitate this exercise and enrich our discussions. So my screen, which industry does your organization operate in? Kindly scan the code. All right, I see we have in charge of controls, senior administrator, partner, director, administrative officer. Thank you. You are such a lovely audience, and I'm grateful for the participation. Right, we also have national service personnel on the webinar as well. That's great. All right. So our next will be kindly scan. We would also like to know what your current role in your organization is. So kindly do same. Great. So we have learn new perspectives on ESG risk management. That's fantastic. To learn practical solutions to ESG challenges in Ghana to add value and knowledge. Great. To learn more about mitigation and managing ESG risk. Right. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful audience and participation in this poll. I will now quickly hand over to our panel speaker, Bernard Owusu-Ansah. So Bernard, if you are ready, the audience is ready, and with high expectations to be able to draw maximum learnings from our sessions today. So Bernard, over to you. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Emma. So thanks for introducing the session today. We'll be dealing with mitigating ESG risk, in essence, to build a resilient and sustainable future, right? So today's session with the UKGCC, we are rightly informed that most of the members of the UKG, the chamber, are online with us today. And we also have other members from industry joining us today. So as you rightly mentioned, our objectives are understanding ESG risk, how they come about, what are they even in the first place? How can you integrate risk management into your strategy and governance, and some effective ways that you can manage ESG risk? And then what is resilience in of itself? So I'll begin by asking a question. What is your perception of business resilience in context of your industry? So for me, I like interactive sessions. So I would like members of the audience to use the chat room to you just tell us some of these. We have given some options for what business resilience would mean to businesses. But if they think what they have is different from this today, they are free to share that. If not, they can just share from the options that we have provided here. So some of the options that we have provided includes a business being adaptable to change, business having good risk management, a business engaging its stakeholders well, a business having the right transformation for digital in terms of their processes that they already have in place, the manual processes, and then having a good sustainability focus on your activities. So from our perspective, when we talk about business resilience, we are talking about all of this. A business being able to attain a level that they can say they are truly resilient means that you're able to withstand any shock, be it in the idiosyncratic shock or shocks that has to do with the market in itself, or shocks from your business operations or shocks from the environment that you operate in. These are all shocks that come to business, and business would have to need, they will need the right mechanisms in place to deal with this. So let's look at business resilience as a topic by itself. So in business today, one of the key things that whenever you pick up any management literature that people are talking about is resilience. How do we ensure the right resilience? And if you would realize, about 5 to 10 years ago, there was a lot of talk about businesses going digital and how data is the new gold. And then you see trends come and go. But with all these, businesses are expected to outlive their owners. And a business would only achieve this if they have the right resilience. And resilience is not something that you get as a one-time thing. It's more of a continuous thing. So with businesses attaining a level of resilience, you need three key things, three key elements to ensure that a business, we can truly call a business resilient, and that through all the evaluation that a business is taking through, you can still arrive at the point where the business is truly seen as being resilient. And the first part is the business has the right long-term planning mechanism, right? So if those who are charged with governance of the business and those who are charged with administering the business have the right foresight and investment that go along to ensure that each time there's a new trend, each time every new trend presents risks and opportunity for a business. How is the business ensuring that it's taking advantage of the opportunities that exist in new trends, and then the risk that new trends present to them, or the risk that new trends exposes the business to, they are being managed in the right way. All this would come into effect through long-term planning. So long-term planning is one first way that you can go about it, because every business that is about a short term, that is about profit being today's profit or the bottom line for the financial year, that business is not looking forward. And the more you keep being short-term in your approach, there's going to be a lot of shocks that come from the business environment that's going to wipe your business off. So long-term planning is the first part of it. The next part is the business itself being adaptable. Now, how do you become adaptable? This is ways that have to do with the internal processes that you have in place. Do you have a mechanism that you always revalidate your strategy? Or do you have a strategy that is stuck in stone, and until the next 5 years, you have to go back and then change? And even regardless of how much things are changing, the business still stays the same. Today, the discussion is ESG. Tomorrow, the discussion might not be ESG, might be something else. That's because ESG would have become business as usual. But then if your business has not become resilient enough to the ESG factors and then the transmission channels, then your business is going to be taken off, or at least the level of relevance that your business had to begin with is going to go down, right? Now, some of these challenges that I'm talking about come from market conditions, some are from regulations. As we talk about ESG today, a lot of the pressures from ESG are coming from regulations. Not all are coming from regulations. Some are coming from stakeholder pressures that we are feeling. So there are businesses that have partners from the UK. Since we are on a UK GCC platform, we need to use examples from UK. So there are businesses with partners from UK who might be their financiers, who have CSRD expectations. And that expectation, even though you might be a Ghanaian business, a wholly owned Ghanaian business, you still have to comply with that. Now, that is a shock that you're not prepared for. Right. Tomorrow, you can have a new partner from Romania or any other part of Europe, where you have to still be prepared for some of these regulatory effects that's going on there. The good thing about ESG is this baseline. You just need to do the right thing. ESG is not something specifically that your business is seen to be going through. So it's everything that the business is about, just being done in the right way to create impact for society. Now, if you keep doing that for yourself and your business has the right mechanisms to be adaptable to change, and you're always allowing yourself to amend with the time, then you're truly going to be resilient. And another part is having innovation. And innovation has to be guided. We always talk about businesses having the right innovation channels in place and all. If you leave innovation just as a function and do not consider the responsibility aspect of it, there's going to be a lot of innovation that is going to be counterproductive to the whole ESG thing that the business is trying to push. So in that case, you're going to have more of a counter benefit to the business because people are going to look at your business like you're greenwashing. So the point that we need to ask ourselves today is, who in an organization, from the various businesses that I've gathered here today, who in your business or which function has been tasked with resilience? You realize that when you go through the organization, you will not find anybody specifically whose factor or whose responsibility is to ensure resilience. I know it's for the board members, it's easy for all of us to put our fingers on board because, of course, they are charged with overall administration. So everything starts and ends with them. But then this is something that all of us need to look at as a function and then own some aspects of it. Now we have a simple quote here that says, in today's business environment, resilience is not only about surviving disruptions, but thriving through them. So whilst we go through today's discussion on ESG risk, I want us to just consider the fact that we are looking at risk as a positive and negative function. So risk is not only going to be counterproductive to the business, risk could also become opportunities. And once we have that mindset in place, then we can keep that and see that, okay, what are the ESG risks that we are exposed to as company A? What are our exposures in terms of ESG, in terms of the environmental aspect, in terms of the social aspect? Are there opportunities in there for us? How are we going to thrive through these opportunities? Now, you can thrive in several ways. You could thrive by just using that as a competitive advantage, or you can thrive by developing products around them, right? We will look at a structured approach towards doing that. So ESG risk refers, in short, to potential negative impacts that your operations or investments are subjected to based on the environmental, social, and governance factors. And then a study that was conducted by MSCI in 2022 found that over 70% of companies today are now exposed to at least moderate ESG risk. So whilst it might seem like something that is far away from us, it's not really far from us. It's something that all of us need to be concerned about, right? It's also highlighting the pervasiveness of these considerations across industries. So how do we convert the risk of ESG into opportunities? That's the question that we need to be asking ourselves after we are done with today's session. Okay. Now, Peter Drucker says that the best way to predict the future is to create it. This is a very common management quote that a lot of people know. But how are we practicalizing this in our industries, in our various companies? How are we creating the future? It's something that you go to people's offices and you see it as placards and as framed into a nice, what do we call it, artwork, and it's hanging on their offices. But how do we practically create the future? It's through these three options that we spoke about: long-term planning, adaptability, and guiding innovation. Guiding innovation such that it has become one part of the business. It has become a function that people know that every year we need to be innovative. So how are we becoming innovative? And how are people being even rewarded for their innovation? These are all connected. All right. Managing and mitigating ESG risk have become crucial for companies and investors for sustainable and responsible business practices. So the first point is we need to understand what ESG risks are. And if you look at a graphic on this page, for instance, you can see the connectivity that various risks have within each other. This is more of telling a story about the evolving risk landscape, right? So if you look at natural resources, you can tell by the risk influence, and then the edges, how it's influencing on other forms of risk. So if we take natural resource shortage, you can see that it's also creating an issue around involuntary migration, which is also creating more issues around terrorist attacks, which is creating more issues. You can link it all the way back to inflation and to asset bubble burst and debts and all these things that for our folks from credit risk understand very well. This is to tell us how interconnected risks are. So you might think of a risk like climate risk, and we always get this thing when we do sessions or webinars or even one-on-one engagements with various companies. What they tend to tell us that, okay, the whole Africa emits about 4% of the world's GHG pollution, right? So if the whole Africa is emitting 4%, that means Ghana is emitting about 0.2% of the global one. That means me as one company in Ghana, let's say the UKGCC, I am emitting about 0.00000. Of what benefit is this to me? The funny part is that whilst we emit the least, we suffer the most impact, or we are part of the regions that suffer the most impact for climate change. So if you look at even from the environmental factor, you know how the environmental factor is also leading to other issues. And environmental factors do not only end with climate change. It goes into resource efficiency, it goes into biodiversity, it goes into even water scarcity and water efficiency, which are all important risk factors. So you look at them, okay, these are ESG factors, good, but how do they transmit into your business? And there are about 8 defined transmission channels that these things tend to come into our businesses. So we need to really get an understanding around them right so that we can progress. Now, the European Banking Authority tried to give a very good definition to ESG risk because for some time now, there's been some challenge about ESG really being a risk or just being factors or just being opportunities and how the taxonomy, how we even define it as. So the EBA gave a definition that I really like. It says that these are environmental, social, and governance matters that may have a positive or negative impact on the financial performance, solvency of an entity, sovereign, or individual. So this is coming from a more financial perspective, right? But it also has positive or negative impacts on your operations. And it has on your solvency, which is your liquidity, your ability to meet your short-term obligations, and then your finance in general, which is what matters to most of us from the business field. So it's important that we look at it from this field. So what are some environmental risks? Now, these are also from the same definition. You can deduce that these are also risks or adverse impacts that are due to the natural environment. And this may affect other forms of risk that you have, like reputational risk, like your profitability, and then business viability in itself. So with this, there are about 5 different, I would like to call them taxonomies or buckets of risk that fall only under environmental. So whilst climate change is on top of the food chain, because there's a lot of support and advocacy for that, due to how scientists tell us how dire the situation is and how the earth might be untenable for all of us. So climate change seems to be the #1 risk that everybody thinks of when they think about environmental risk. You need to think about the every ecological challenge that we are having and how that has an impact on your books, how that has an impact on the people that even works for you. So if you're looking at climate risk, what climate risk will lead to higher temperatures. And having people experience higher temperatures, there are studies that shows that the more workers, the hotter the temperature for workers, the least productive they become. So if you conduct these 2 things, you realize that this has a direct impact on your bottom line, and it has a direct impact on your production capacity itself if you're a manufacturing company. And this should not be taken lightly. Because if you look at climate risk, it includes rising sea levels, it includes disruptions, even transition risk that come from it. And transition risk has more to do with policies from government, right? Regulatory changes, shifting consumer preferences. So if you happen to own a book or a printing press, you realize that with time, the number of people who are coming to you to print is going down. And this is direct impact of climate risk on your business. But you might not be able to trace it because you haven't really identified what a transmission channel for this particular climate risk is. A lot of people think of climate risk and then they only consider the physical risk, which is the risk that some of your assets may become bad due to exposures to hot temperatures or to floods and to all that. But think also about the transition risk. What are organizational policies going to be like? What are your suppliers' policies going to be like? So the more you pollute the earth and the more the youth hit the streets to campaign against galamsey and some of these issues, think about how suppliers are going to want to distance themselves from you. How are you going to manage this as well? This is one aspect that for every responsible business, the board should not be able to sleep on this. They should be able to brood over this and have the right mechanism to deal with this. Now, when it comes to regulatory and compliance risk, these are risks that come from your non-compliance with some of the environmental laws and regulations that are coming up. Few days ago, the Carbon Market Office of the EPA said they are deliberating on the Article 6, which they are still trying to review and come up with their comments and then send for finalization with the UNFCCC. Then it would come up with more regulation to make environmental assessment more mandatory in this country, such that if you're coming to start any project, you have to go seek environmental assessment first. And it's going to be a continuous thing. So this is another impact of regulatory and climate risk that is coming directly into your business. So businesses who are going into PPP with government would always have to go and seek that environmental assessment. We have an element of it already existing, but they are trying to get Article 6 to make it, to reinforce it and make it more of a permanent thing that becomes part of almost every project that goes on in this country. It's the same for the social risk as well. You have resource scarcity, community relations. Now, if you have, let's say you are an energy company who transmits oil or you transmit gas through some communities, you have your pipes, your pipeline through some communities. Now, if you don't have the right relationship with the community, anytime they get agitated and anytime they take arms, your business will come to a standstill. And this is something that goes against the resilience that we are trying to build, because you will always have to call back the business continuity people to come and help you get your business back on track. Always you're dealing with disasters and crisis management, whereas all you had to do is to take ESG serious, take the social aspect of ESG serious, because that's one of the most slept on parts, the social aspect, and then engage the community effectively, have the right diversity and inclusion policies in place. Issues of employee health and safety, they have direct channels into your profitability, right? Okay, because these things come at legal cost to your business. These things come at compliance cost to your business. This thing comes with, and there's the financial contagion of this part, which also leads to some credit assessment. There will be credit assessment made on your company, and then you realize that you score low, but financially you're doing well. But it's because of some of these factors. Because today, rating agencies are all looking at these factors when they are considering risk that a business faces. So it's important that within ourselves, we first of all get an understanding. Now let's even look at the governance risk. Governance risk, most people do not factor it in place. If you look at public institutions, they do not care so much about governance risk because for them, they are more about the impacts they create. And if you're creating external impact, then your focus will be on environmental and then social. But what's the point of a business being faced or a business being dirty and then having a good product? That in itself is an element of greenwashing. Having a dirty company, a company that does not have the right board and governance mechanisms in place, the business itself is all over the place. You go into their processes, the executive compensation is being determined by the executive members themselves as and when they feel like, with disregard for whether they are creating value for all stakeholders. And then you don't have the right shareholder rights management. You're not transparent and you're not disclosing the right factors to all your stakeholders. And when I say stakeholders, it goes beyond your shareholders. It goes to even the general public, customers, and your employees who also deserve to know some of these things. I understand it's not everything they can know, but some of these things. So you need to really consider how this is impacting your business. Now let's take board governance risk. So you need to assess the vulnerability of the organization to some of these risks, which include risk associated with the composition and the independence of your directors, right? Now this affects decision making and their oversight ability. So if you have a rubber stamp board who just come together and then share money and all they do is just agree to whatever the shareholder is saying, then the business itself is not seen to be doing the right thing. So you're losing on the G factor. And you need to understand once again, that when we talk about ESG, it's more of a framework that is towards investors. So sustainability in general exists. You creating economic value for your shareholders is part of it. You creating local content is part of it. So local content, that's how much you're inputting into the economy and how much you're inputting into the local ecosystems, business systems that exist. That's your suppliers and so on. That exists. But investors, when they are assessing your business today, they look at the E, S, and G factors. That's the G is important to them because that tells them how well the business is being run. So in terms of executive compensation, if there is excessive pay and poorly structured compensation plans where people are not even, all they care about is performance, and the performance is even structured in a way that there could be gaming in the system. People can just take advantage of anything just to make bonus for today and go away. And there's short-termism. Then you are diffusing the whole sustainability element, which means holding stewardship of today's resources for tomorrow's use, right? So if people are just enriching themselves with compensation today unduly, because in some cases it's deep, they are doing that today with a short-term mentality such that the business would not be doing well tomorrow, then that's something that investors would care about. And then when you go to shareholder rights, of course, that deals directly with investors. And then your risk management frameworks and how transparent the business is. Because for any investor, most of them, they are not going to be involved in the operational activities. So they will be on the outside looking in. And most of them too, if they are not a majority shareholder, they might not have the ability to appoint somebody to represent them on the board. So the only way they will get the right information is if the business is being transparent. And this is something that shareholders care about a lot today. So there's a risk that's coming from this to businesses. And our businesses have to look at this with a risk perspective and say, what are the risks? How we should be able to quantify it. And then say, what are the mechanisms that we have in place to ensure that our governance system are very transparent, our governance system are robust in a way. Now, those will be the controls that you employ. So whilst we are understanding ESG risk, I want us to look at these simple channels just to be able to understand how risk drivers are transmitting into our books so that we know that all these things we are speaking about, it may look like they are not really part of our business because think about it. I own a company that produces biscuits. You're telling me about climate change. What has that got to do with me if I'm producing biscuits? But then it goes once again to lower profitability. That's a transmission channel. And if you deep lower profitability, if you dig deep into it, you find issues like higher costs. And higher costs also come from, or high raw materials cost. That comes from maybe a physical risk of climate, which means that some of the places that you source your raw materials from, or you would have ordinarily source your raw materials from, are assessing the impact of climate risk so much that they are not able to even produce at the capacity that they used to produce for you. So this is a risk that you have to deal with. So you go deep into the channel, you go deep into how it affects your books, and then you try to find the source and mitigate it from that angle. That's the best way to deal with this. But if you look at climate risk as a whole, or as you, biscuit making business, let me say my favorite biscuit growing up was Palace biscuit. So let's say Palace biscuit, Abedi Palace biscuit. If you say that you're trying to deal with climate change in general, then you might feel powerless and say that there's not so much you could do in your capacity, but there's much you could do in your capacity when it comes to your contribution to worsening the situation or your contribution to mitigating the situation for the places that you source your materials from. Now, it can even transmit through your supply chain, right? So you get a lot of supply chain inefficiency, supply chain risk, and your suppliers are always coming back and they are always having legal issues. That mostly come from social sources. If you have some social risk, and then there's change in market sentiment to a supplier or a partner that you are so attached to, you know that this is going to come with increased cost of compliance to you. It's going to come with increased legal cost to you. And you can trace this to some of the known risks that we already are aware of, like market risk, like operational risk, and then reputational risk, which is more emerging today. And it's the same for governance. All these transmit normally through these six, and most time the financial contagion risk, like credit risk and all that. This is how they transmit into your books. Let's look at some push factors that is ensuring that ESG risk is becoming very topical, especially in boardrooms today, everywhere you pass. And then one thing that comes to mind with the push factors is emergence of risk. So the WEF, that's their global risk report every year. And for the 2024 report, you realize that there's a lot of ESG risk. And for the past 5 years or so, since 2019.
All right, Bernard, we have 2 questions.
Okay.
Right, so from Lydia, she's asking, can you please explain the risk drivers once again? I'm not too clear on the linkage. And from Juwon says, can I ask questions related to ESG sustainability reporting? Yes, you can. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so I'll start with Juwon's question. Yes, so sustainable reporting is also a risk on its own. So yes, you can definitely ask questions on reporting because it also has compliance risk for businesses. And then Lydia asked about the link between the drivers and then the channels, right? Okay, so when in my explanation, I mentioned that a lot of people are refusing to call ESG factors as risk because they also present opportunities and they are more of a sustainability issues. So in the risk community, what people tend to call them are their drivers, they are factors. So if you look at climate issue, the issue of climate right now, it's a factor. So under climate, you have physical risk, you have transition risk. These things are seen as factors and they are being transmitting through these channels. The channels here, they're transmitting these channels. And these channels are leading you to the more known risk that we know, right? So for instance, with if you take something like policy change in relation to climate risk. So for instance, the government was contemplating bringing a carbon emission tax. This is a clear policy that is going to be felt on people's pockets and is going to be felt by businesses. So if you had a business that relied so much on a plant which you run on diesel, you have to be considering how you move to or you transition to a more efficient energy source for that particular plant or bringing in a new plant. Now, this is transmitting through the lower asset performance, is also transmitting through the cost, the increased cost of compliance. And then this is going to come into the financial risk that you already know, which would be a risk like operational risk for you, because once you do not comply with this, you're going to have regulatory challenges. Is there another question?
Yes, Bernard, awesome. So Juwon again also wanted, I think, added some comments to the G governance risk. He's saying, is it mandatory to include details on executive compensation, for example, salaries, sitting allowances, etc., in ESG or sustainability reports? If yes, what standards mandate such? There are a few more comments I probably want to read. There's no name here, but it says all the above. He was answering the question also, though I might add that every industry will have different factors depending on the factors like their location and government policies. So I'll let you take these and then I'll continue with the rest of the comments.
All right. Thank you, Emma. And thank you, Juwon, Lydia, and the rest who are all participating. Thank you so much for making this more interactive. So as I was continuing for Lydia, these policies here come through these channels. So if you look at so let's take a social risk, for instance, and then also look at how it's also coming through. So if you have employee health and safety, or labor practices. These are all risk, but in the risk perspective, they are seen more as drivers. So if you have a union, an active union in your workplace, now they can slow down, they can disrupt business today. So they form more of an operational risk. It comes through the operational risk perspective. So you have to look at this and look at the channel that they are coming through. And if you look at the 6 channels that we even have here, they'll be coming through the performance, they'll be coming through the profitability channel. There are some of these risks, like if some of these social risks that will be coming through, especially with community relation, that comes through lower household wealth. And if you have people with lower household wealth, what that means is that it's going to result in a market risk, because people's ability to demand the products that you're putting out in a Ghanaian market, unless maybe you don't care about the Ghanaian market, which your investors would care because you exist in Ghana, you don't exist in a vacuum. Then the point would be, how is this lower household wealth, how is it impacting your books? And it's going to come through your market risk. And whichever investor that you'll be dealing with today, the credit analyst ecosystem today, they are very much aware of this. They have caught up with the investment people who were ahead in terms of this ESG risk thing. So today, whenever you're going to assess any facility, some of these drivers will be looked at, and they will come even through the KYCs and the due diligence that whoever is advancing the facility to you would be coming from. Okay, so you mentioned Juwon's question was on executive pay. That's a very interesting one. With executive pay, whenever we are talking about ESG risk reporting, executives are very interested in why they need to put this out there. Right now in Ghana, is it mandatory? No, it's not. But which standards allow it? There's a standard on executive pay from GRI. If you're a listed company in Ghana, the GSE's disclosure manual requires that you comply with GRI, or you report in line with GRI. And then there's a standard from GRI which speaks about executive pay. What most people tend to do is they tell about the policies around executive pay, sometimes not necessarily the figures. For most in the financial service sector, the regulator is requiring disclosure. So people will disclose how much loans were even advanced to executives and all that. But for most businesses, they will talk about how much, what the policies are, how they result in this executive pay. Sometimes they will even give a ball figure for executive pay, what the executive took in total, not necessarily what MD took, what a chief risk officer took, what board chairman took, and all that. So sometimes it's in contrast, especially when you have shareholders or you have partners who are more dormant and they want to know the details of what's going on within the business. So that's how that becomes a risk, because sometimes the demand will be coming through your own stakeholders who are very closer to you than maybe from a more regulatory and governance place. Is there a question again?
Right. So from Enoch says, one interconnected factor of the rise in prominence is investors' demand. Just like you said earlier, investors are very much concerned about our ESG risk management. That's very correct, Enoch. Thank you. Olga Sue's asking, I also wanted to find out if there are legal requirements for companies to employ ESG compliance officers and including their reports, their ESG risk reports or sustainability reports.
So I'll say thanks for the comments and then the suggestions and the feedback that's coming from people. So yes, is there currently legislation requiring companies to have a compliance officer? There's no clear-cut one, but every legislation is requiring that there's governance around it. It's not clearly saying that have a compliance officer. What we see in the market is there are a lot of businesses who tend to put ESG under an already existing function. So you go to some place, it's been domiciled under risk. And then the risk management people are treating ESG more from a risk perspective. You go to some places, it's under strategy, and they have somebody who's in charge of strategy, who's also handling ESG as part of it. And then you go to some places, it's even with finance, because finance are already doing reporting. So they are looking at ESG more from a reporting perspective. So they say, okay, these people already have the capacity to report, and they've been doing our annual report, so let's just assign it to them. But it's all about the ambition that a business is going with. And ESG is not a one function thing. No single function or officer put in place can ensure that a business does the right ESG across board. It will have to be more of a combined effort, right? And maybe there has to be an officer who coordinates it. So if wherever it's being placed, it's not really the reason. So if when you're disclosing, whoever your regulator is, if you're disclosing to the GSE today, because you're a listed company, you would have to show them clearly how your ESG governance is. So do you have a board committee for it? How often does the board even discuss ESG issues? It's important. Do you have policy around ESG issues? Which policies do you have in place? Is it just a conflict of interest policy, or do you have policies on diversity? Do you even have targets? Are these targets linked to executive bonuses and all? Or executive bonuses are just purely based on performance and then it has nothing to do with environmental and social impact? So these are all ways that you can define the governance better than just saying, okay, we have a compliance officer and then we've done a tick box exercise. In such cases, you go there and that compliance officer does not even have the right authority. And you need the right authority to make good changes, because ESG will go through your entire business model. Some parts of your business model will have to change. Some aspects of operations will have to change. And you need persons with the right authority to mandate this. Okay. So the risk it has become apparent that if you look at within the next 2 years, then the risk that they see coming, when you take away misinformation, you look at extreme weather events, societal polarization, even cyber insecurity has elements of governance in it, interstate armed conflict and all these are ESG factors. Most of these are ESG factors. And if you go to the 10-year horizon, it's even worse. So this is creating more of an impact that, no, ESG risk are things that we need to take into account. Whether we call them risk or we call them risk drivers, they still need to be taken account, and then our risk management approaches need to include this and incorporate this in how we look at things. Now, it's the same for regulations. Regulations are also pushing this. We start from global goals, the UN SDGs. Every company is expected to play their part because you control some resources. It might not be the highest resource in a country or in the world, but you still control some resources, and your input is material to somebody. So you need to change that person's behavior. Wherever money goes, human behavior changes. If that is the case, then where our money is being placed, we need to ensure that the right behaviors are following suit. Now, there are a lot of reporting frameworks that are coming, and it's also complicating the ESG risk perspective, right? There's some consolidation going on with the IFRS S1, S2 to make the reporting more seamless and then more comparable between jurisdictions. Then there is regulations as well, which are coming, which for our perspective, we still have Bank of Ghana coming with its own climate-related financial risk directive and several other. Now, for companies who have partners in Europe, you have to deal with the CSRD. And we will look at the regulatory landscape shortly. So when we go to the pull factors, these are some of the external ESG pressures that are coming into the business. One comes from society. If you look at the composition of society today, there's a lot of millennials, there's a lot of Gen Z people, and these people are joining our workforce. And these people, unlike some of us from the earlier generations, they care a lot about purpose. So what is the purpose of the business that they are becoming a part of? Why should they buy from this? And today, especially with the advent of social media, a lot of things cannot be hidden. Even if it's hidden, they'll blow it out of proportion. And then you find that, especially when it comes to the social impact that a business is creating, easily customers can choose to boycott your business. In Ghana, boycotts often work for about a month or two, and then people will just revert back to normal. But within that month or two, you would have lost a lot of business, which could impact your bottom line for the year, which will then impact whoever your investor or your partner is. Now, access to capital. One of our participants shared that investors are pushing this, so you should know that businesses who have the right ESG risk compliance matrix in house and they are doing the right thing, they will be accessing capital at very, very reduced rates. Then, if you look at issues like C-suite pressure, because they are also feeling the pressure from above, and then trying to just create workforce of the future and having the right investment returns, you still revert back today to ESG issues. And these are all making ESG issues complex for businesses to deal with. So when you look at the risk landscape, what matters is you need to align your vision, right? You need to define what the vision is, where to play, and then how you're going to win. This matters. First part is looking at who matters to you, be it your investors, your regulators, and it's not only about their financial impact on your business. Some of them might bring finance, some of them too is just impact, because if you look at community, there might be people in the community who don't even buy from you or who don't do business with you in any way, but they are still very powerful people that they can change opinion about your business. And these people, you have to consider what are the issues that matter to them. Then you come down to the issues and look at, there are a lot of issues. You cannot do everything. You cannot deal with everything at a time. But what are the most material to you? What matters? But all these stems from your ambition, right? So if you come to your ambition, some people are looking at ESG risk from more of a compliance perspective. Okay, we are being compliant now. So we are being compliant now. So all they do is a checklist affair, just do the bare minimum. And some people are also looking at it from the perspective of it being a strategic imperative. So they are using ESG to gain strategic advantage. So that's when they try to find business, they create business models out of ESG. They try to reinvent the operational model. They try to use ESG or even create products out of them. And some of them too are trying to go the full extent. That is becoming transformative with their ESG. Now, you have to consider all these things in your approach. So as business, when you deal with ESG risk and how you're going to mitigate your ESG risk, you need to look at it from what your ambition is in the first place. Because if it's all about compliance, then yes, maybe having a compliance officer who has a few checklists here and there, trying to create the right report for the SEC or whoever your regulator is every quarter, then you're good. As long as the regulator does not come to you, hey, I have dealt with these ESG issues and I am managing my ESG risk. Well, that could pass. It will be passable, but you need to look at the magnitude of risk on your strategy that you're implementing, and then look at how you can even use it to your advantage. And with some people, they've considered ESG as something that's here to stay. So they are transforming their whole approach to ESG. The interesting thing about that is that when you transform your whole approach to ESG, you become more efficient. So let's say the amount of energy that you consume. A lot of businesses today, they do hybrid work thanks to COVID. COVID introduced the working from home, and you realize that during work from home, even the cost of electricity bills that you pay as a business reduce to a large extent. Now, you can make this as part of your operational model, such that people who are not part of factory workers, because I don't see how you can be a remote working factory worker, but people who are in the back office can tend to do some days at home and some days, and that's part of ESG, because you're dealing with employee well-being and you're also creating a well-incentivized employee force. However, through this, you also become very efficient with your energy. Reporting, whilst you do one thing or mitigating one risk, you can be reporting on 2 or 3 metrics that are benefiting from this. Right. Emma, please, are there any questions up to this point?
Yes, Vinaj. Right, so there's a comment here that reads, it's anonymous actually, but it says disclosure for executive pay should primarily not be motivated or engineered from what standard or the framework requires. I think this is a concern about disclosing benefits of committee members or people at the board, because there's a need for calculating those compensations and ensuring that these disclosures are not actually made. So this is from it's anonymous. So
I don't get what is the person saying. It should not be encouraged.
Yes, it shouldn't be encouraged. Shouldn't be encouraged. And then the last thing would be, so what's one compelling reason a company should hire a sustainability officer? There was one question I missed.
Can you repeat that?
So what's one compelling reason?
Compelling reason.
Yes.
Okay.
A company should hire a sustainability officer. And there was one question at the top I think I did miss. I want to read that out. It's from Florence. And she's also asking, what is the effect of ESG in the banking system? Thank you.
Effects of ESG in the banking system. Okay. All right. So I'll take from the first one, which says that executive pay should not be encouraged. I'll beg to differ. I think it should be encouraged because it's more about transparency, right? So I would always revert to the the GRI Secretary for Africa, who shared an anecdote on one particular instance in South Africa where there's a business. And then with this business, they disclosed the MG's compensation. And then they found out that you see, sometimes when you talk about executive compensation, it goes hand in hand with the least paid person in the business. So you're looking at the ratio. And advocacy is not that the least paid person gets paid as much as the MD. No, that's not the point. The point is that how fair is the business? How fair are those stewarding the business, those charged with governance to lead the business towards sustainable business? How fair are they being to the business in itself? Because if you're disclosing something, you're more likely to be doing the right thing than not doing the right thing. So in this case, they found that when the least paid person works 72 years non-stop without taking a dime from their salary and all their bonuses for the 72 years, they are going to make 1 month of what the MD makes. This is very demoralizing for people in the business. And so they find that, okay, either one side needs to come up or one side needs to come down. Because when you think about sustainability, think about creating shared value, creating value that can be shared for all. And for all, we are not talking about only employees, society as a whole. So society starts from your shareholders, it starts from board members, it starts from MD, it starts from workers, it starts from everybody, even the community. How are people benefiting from the economic impacts that you're creating? So if most of these economic impacts that you're creating, somebody might not even do this least paid against most paid ratio, but they will just do this they will just do a ratio of how much you're even contributing to community social responsibility or community project initiatives against executive pay. And they find that executive pay is like 50% more than the company is committing to. That's like, you're not, even though you might be doing something, but you're not really doing much, or you're not sharing the value. So if we are trying to do good, we need to do good holistically. And that means we need to have the right mechanisms in place. That's why the policies, when you look at any standard around executive compensation, executive pay, it starts from the policy, disclosing what the policies are. So if the policies are right and the policies are the right policies, then even if MD is earning $1 billion, it will be earned, and everybody will understand that this is $1 billion that he deserves to take home. But if MD is getting some amount of money that is way too much than everybody in the value chain, it becomes an issue. And then that's when people would not want to disclose. Somebody asked about compelling reason for having a sustainability officer. So the truth is, if you look at even the factors here, having governance and risk, data and technology, and all these things as part, you will need somebody with a sustainability knowledge to be able to coordinate from all parts. There have been instances when we have gone into businesses and we have tried to help them, and there are processes that people have been manning for so long, and they didn't even know. If you ask them what are the sustainable elements in it, they don't know. But they've been doing this. They've been hiring women. They don't even know why they're hiring women, and they sit in HR. But they don't know this has an impact on sustainability. So you need somebody with the knowledge. Now, when it comes to sustainability and ESG, this is where people with the finance knowledge, the people with the risk knowledge, and the people with the scientific knowledge would all be put together in one room to share the ideas and be able to put it all together. So if you have one person who is being tasked with the responsibility of sustainability and he's coordinating it across board, he's not going to be like an internal auditor with assurance function, but he will be more of an advisor across board, and he will be the same person who will be checking everybody. So it's really important that you have somebody whose responsibility is that. And it's even important that you have an executive at an executive level, somebody who's been tasked with overseeing that, to make it easier and then to make responsibility more congruent in a way, right? So there was another question on the effects of ESG in banking. Yes, so for banking, it's more so, you see, banks control resources in an economy. They are like a pivot for resources. So they determine where resources go to, where resources do not go to. In the past few weeks, there's been a lot of talk about galamsey and canceling galamsey and all these things. Now, if banks alone decide that they are not going to give any facility to anybody who is undertaking any work of mining, that's not one of the known mines, they alone can stop it even before government policy comes and then all these things come, because they control the resources. Definitely, you're going to find some people who have their own resources or who find the resources from other means, but the banking sector provides a lot of the resource. So ESG is more important there. That's why the Bank of Ghana came up with the sustainable banking principles in 2019, before even every other, maybe with the exception of EPA, but every other regulatory body started coming up with any form of ESG regulation. So over there, if you look at how we looked at the transmission channels, if you look at climate risk, for instance, climate risk it can transmit through profitability, can transmit through a lot of the channels that we looked at into their credit books. There might be facilities that you have loaned out, and then the collateral or the security would be an asset. This asset might be in a place that is prone to earthquake. This asset might be in a place that is prone to floods. Banks are now considering the physical risk as part of their risk management approach. So whenever they are quantifying and then they are doing their stress testing and all these things, they consider that. So they are not just considering only climate, they're also considering some social aspect. Because if you're a business who operates in a place that you don't have the right relationship with your community, your risk, your credit risk is going to go high when they finish doing their due diligence on you. Definitely. So the impact of ESG in the banking sector is really high, and for them, the regulation is really strong on them. Today, the Bank of Ghana is about to issue their climate-related financial risk directive to make it even more palpable for them. So I'll proceed with the discussion, Emma. So this slide presents us with the regulatory landscape as it is currently, that businesses have to deal with. And we know that regulatory landscapes create compliance risk, because once you have regulations, you have to comply. And that is a known risk that businesses have to deal with. So if you look at the Ghanaian part of it, I mean, with the petroleum sector, people in the energy and petroleum sector, you have to deal with issues of local content and local participation, which is an issue. It shouldn't be an issue, but if you're not being deliberate and you're not including this as part of your strategy to begin with, you will get to the end of the year or getting close to the end of the year, receiving these sanctions and receiving these letters from the regulator. That's when you start trying to find some local people as part of your vendor base, and you're not going to find the right people. And they're also going to come up with their own challenges, like delays, like not giving you the right quality, or even when it comes to expertise that you require, right? Then there's sustainable banking principles for those in the financial sector. The SEC has its own corporate governance code, which mandates some of these governance issues that we spoke about, and it's more for listed entities. The BOG came back again with another governance disclosure directive for banks. The stock exchange also has its own. Then there's the IFRS S1, S2 that ICAG has adopted and is going to make it mandatory from the 2027 year. Excuse me. So it begs the question that how are businesses safeguarding themselves against? Which of these apply to you? If you go to Europe too, same. The CSRD and the EFRAG or EFRS regulations have become ripe, and then it applies not only to entities within the European jurisdiction, but if an entity within the European jurisdiction has material impact on you and you're even in Ghana, you have to comply to it. So always when we are trying to engage with our partners in the UK, when we are trying to engage with our partners in other parts of the world, we should be looking at the ESG concerns over there. What are the regulations? Are we already safeguarded against them? Are we doing the right thing? Or do we need to do some additional things to ensure that we are right to begin with, right? So before 2019, there were regulations on specific aspects of ESG, like maybe environmental. If you take the EPA's own environmental assessment regulation, That was amended in 2002. But now they are more becoming like frameworks, which are encompassing the whole ESG. So you find that the SEC is coming up with its own framework for ESG. So it's not only going to be about G, it's going to look at environmental and social aspects as well. There's been a definition of what green finance taxonomy is, even in this country. A few weeks ago, it was done. So the regulation aspect of it is becoming right. Now, beyond that, there are global initiatives like the International Cocoa Initiative, which is promoting child protection in the cocoa growing communities and then the cocoa value chain. So if you're part of the cocoa value chain or the agri value chain, you should be looking at some of these things, because this risk would present itself sometimes when you start exporting your products, and then the regulators over there start requesting for some of these things. Because there are no regulations over here, you might not have considered them as risk for yourself. But you need to really be careful about this. When you go to the Responsible Minerals Initiative, it's saying it's for them, they are looking at resources to make your sourcing decisions improve, and then have some of the regulatory compliance in mind. Can mining become very sustainable? That is a question that is left to be answered, but it can be responsible. So how are you ensuring this responsibility? If there are no regulations here that is guiding you, you should still look for the regulation in your partner countries, so that you manage all the risk that the regulation poses to you. Okay, in the UK, there is extended producer responsibility for packaging, which has been delayed over like a year, and then they are looking at 2027 timeline. It will require companies who are importing or supplying packaged products to brands in the UK. It will require them to comply with some recycling aspects. You'll be required to recycle a big part of the products that you're producing. And then you need to have some ESG risk frameworks in place to be able to allowed under this particular initiative that they are bringing. But the good thing is that they are for companies that have more than £2 million annual turnover. So maybe you are an SME for now and you might feel like it does not apply to you. By the time they say more money, more problems, by the time you're growing and you're getting higher turnover, you'll be experiencing most of these challenges to deal with. Emma, do you have any questions, so I can move straight to how we align strategy to ESG risk to strategy?
All right, so I'll just pick quick comments. So it's also an anonymous here, but he says, how can executives balance ESG commitment with the priorities of activist investors for a profit-oriented, and tend to threaten executives with replacement when you're not getting things their way?
Can you kindly retake that?
Yes. So I think he's trying to ask how executives can balance ESG commitments with priorities of activist investors to stay profitable, and then they tend to threaten executives with replacement when they're not getting things their way. So maybe there's a misalignment between what the tone at the top and what the team wants. And also from KKKK, he's saying we are seeing a trend of some entities pushing back heavily against ESG investment for political reasons. As an asset manager, how do you balance long-term sustainability of your portfolio with the short-term priorities? I think of some clients. I think he's also seeing how he can.
The asset management.
Exactly. Then from Enoch, he's asking, should a company in Ghana be concerned about its mother company regulations in the European country? That'll be it.
Okay, so I'll start from Enoch's own, which is relatively easier because of what. Yes, you should be concerned, because your mother company will start requiring you to be taking some of these things. Now, we saw this from the SOX Act, which tried to have robust internal controls. So from the Enron scandals and all these scandals that goes on in the other advanced worlds, what happened is there was a SOX Act, Sarbanes-Oxley Act, that came up, and companies were expected to do control self-assessments and internal controls over financial reporting and these reviews. So these reviews became more of a thing in that part of the world. They still haven't been mandated in this part of the world. But if you have a mother company that your report feeds into their report, they are going to expect you to also safeguard yourself here. And it's going to be the same way. The more they take data from you to report as part of their sustainability reporting, as part of their impact reporting, as part of their ESG reporting, transparency reporting, all the reporting suits that they do, they are going to request that you also have the right safeguards to ensure that at least the data is coming from the right source. So that's the first part. The second part is that the issues that are material over there are not being underplayed over here. So you need to consider the issues that are material to them. It might not necessarily be material to your factors here, but at least you still need to have a good risk management over it, or at least governance around it, to ensure that it does not get out of hands. Because if it does, then there's going to be an issue. There's going to be a disconnect. Any advocate can pick up and say that I'm just citing an example. Company ABC is touting their horns that they've done well in the case of, let's say, antitrust and customer protection. But if you go to Ghana, go and look at this advert that the same ABC is doing in Ghana. They are doing this and that, and they have no concerns for consumer safety. They have no concerns for competition and this, that. So even though that might have not been an issue in this part of the world, it will still apply to them. So your parent company will soon start requesting you. So it will be good for you to be proactive now. Now, I think the first question was about balancing pressures from investors. So if this is clearly when you have investors who do not care about ESG, and there are a lot of investors too who do not care about ESG. They do not outnumber in terms of their holding worldwide the investors who care about ESG. So I think for a long time, Warren Buffett was a very known critic of sustainability in general. If a big investor like Warren Buffett is part of these people, then they are part of the detractors. And they are always going to complain about ESG costs. If you spend any cost that goes to ESG, they are not going to agree. So how you deal with that is through engagement, it's through training. Sometimes you have to train them. Some people, it's one thing knowing the right thing and not doing it. It's another thing not knowing what to do in the first place and just assuming that people are just wasting money. So training on the impact, and then also trying to balance the scale, because no matter what, there might be an interest that matters to them. So you see, the thing with ESG is when you're seeing pushing factors that are not material to your business, you need to look at what are the matters. Which ones are material to us? Which ones will come back in a cyclical effect through some of the transmission channels we spoke about to impact our books? And when you're managing it, it's more likely that you have the investors on board. And which ones are of impact that maybe stakeholders are expecting of us? If you're doing those ones too, they'll be more on board. But if, let's say, you're a manufacturing company and you're trying to help with financial inclusion and all that, you're going to get investors pushback because they do not see how that connects. There should be a connectivity with it. And that's one sure way to get about it. Materiality is not assessed by the ESG officer or the compliance officer alone. It should be a stakeholder-wide approach so that the investors or whoever, maybe their board members or whatsoever, they get to know that this is not only coming from one person. It's coming from everybody that's the business concerns. And these are the things that we have chosen to invest our time in. It's also important to educate them on the benefits that this is going to be getting for the business going forward. Okay, some people just have short-term mindset and they may not care. So in that case, you may have your work cut out for you. But either ways, doing the right thing is still good. As we say, ESG is not something necessarily that you do. But if you're doing whatever you're doing and you're doing it in the right way, you're still within the ESG space as well. There was another question, I think it was the second question that has skipped me from the asset management perspective.
Let me take that second. So it's from KKK. He's saying we're seeing a trend of some entities pushing back heavily against ESG investment for political reasons. As an asset manager, how do you balance long-term sustainability of your portfolio with short-term priorities of some clients?
Okay, so I think for that, it's more about diversification, right? I think diversifying is the only route, especially if these people with the pushbacks have more of a bigger stake. If they have more of a bigger stake, there's not so much you have to do, but you also have your credibility at stake as well, because these people will not be with you forever. So you have to diversify and just, once again, more training. It's the way, because you are doing the right thing with ESG. There are a lot of studies today that is telling us that green funds are outperforming brown for the lack of better word, let me just call them brown, or funds that are not sustainable, or funds that are the proceeds are being used for other activities. Green funds are doing well today. So you're on the right path. So it's more about training these people, giving these people the right guidance. And then also, you mentioned for political reasons, I may not understand the entire political spectrum. So you try to balance it, because sometimes the political reason could be the particular activity that the funds are supporting. If you're investing in something that is, especially when we go to the social aspect, there are things that some people do not agree with. So once again, materiality becomes important. Knowing the factors that we are going to support is important. But at least if the investment is against maybe ESG risk investment or ESG compliance investment, then for that you're doing the right thing, because you have to safeguard the funds, the assets that you're managing. So you need to have the right mechanisms in place to help yourself do that. Okay. Emma, do you have any more, or should we just proceed with?
Yes, there's one more. She is from Ifioma. She's asking if for a recap. She says, I did not get the part about brands exporting to the EU/UK. What did you say about recycling and frameworks?
Okay. So I think, yes, with the UK one, the UK is coming up with extended producer responsibility. They call it EPR for packaging. And it will come really into effect somewhere around October 2027. It requires companies who are importing or supplying packaged products to own brands in the UK. So if maybe you are exporting to the UK, from our perspective, you are exporting to the UK a packaged product, or maybe you are just supplying package to a company in the UK. There will be a lot of requirements on you to commit to recycling. And there'll be a lot of requirements on you especially to comply with some financial frameworks that they will bring in place. That whole framework has not been released yet, but it's still in the works. And it's something that we as a chamber need to avail ourselves to, or consider whenever we are making decisions. We need to know that this thing is happening, and we need to maybe go online, look deeper into it, into how it affects your particular business. Now, this is where, if you have a compliance officer, he will have to earn his bread. You have to go in there and see what are the actual implications. Okay, do we even have the right recycling policy in place already? That's okay, we are already in the green of this particular policy, whether it comes out or not. If not, how do we set up a recycling policy? In Ghana, are there enough recycling plants that we can even partner with? And how do we even ensure that there's circularity in our resources? The waste becomes maybe another resource for another organization, and we're able to disclose this appropriately. It's important that we have that in mind, and then we keep to managing this before the EPR also surprises us, and it becomes an issue of how do we deal with this and where do we go and all. But the catch is that for now, they are looking at companies that are above the 2 million annual turnover threshold. So you have to be 2 million pounds and above. Who knows, by 2030, it might have been reduced to almost everybody, or the government would have adopted this across board. So if you deal in the UK, or you have partners in the UK, you have to start considering these things, because it's important before they start charging you with cost of recycling. Okay, so I'll continue with how you can align ESG risk as part of your strategy, right? Now, everything starts with strategy and cascading your vision and ambition through the business. Because if you have a corporate strategy that you're implementing, and you also have your risk approach, and they are running parallels, you're going to have a lot of issues, because people from the performance side will not see what they will just see. It's like how you go to a lot of businesses and they regard compliance officers as sort of people who are obstacles. We are trying to do this, and these people are always drawing us back. It happens a lot in the financial sector. These people are always coming with their regulations, and we shouldn't be doing this. No, but this should be embedded as part already. So when you go to the governance aspect, strategy takes 3 key elements. The first element is setting the vision. Now, this vision needs to include an ESG component of it. How do we even see ourselves within the next 5 years that we are setting our strategy for? What's the objective? The objective needs to be green in nature. We need to have green as part of it. Yes, profit matters. There's no way you can understate profit because that's the whole point of risk. Profit matters, but how green do we want to be seen? What does green even mean to us as a business? So let's say we as an asset management company, what does being ESG compliant mean to us? We need to include that as part of the vision that we even start with. Then we can even have KPIs that we can measure to it. And then the KRIs would stem directly from these KPIs that we are bringing up. Now, you need to look at the opportunities that avail for you when you're looking at where to play in terms of the strategy, where to play, where you're going to maximize your resources and then your investments and ensure that you make the most out of your resource that you are investing. You look at which areas are you going to put more focus on. Now, whilst you're looking at this, you need to look at which ESG areas should you also be looking at so that you will convert some of this risk directly into opportunities. And it becomes something that people are expected to do already, and not something that after they are doing their work, they need to come and just comply with. And it becomes more of an afterthought because when you have risk as an afterthought, that's when it crystallizes and it catches up with you. Right. So the ownership should be something that is defined from the board level. Who is in charge of ESG? Do we have a committee or are we going to subject it as part of something that another committee is taking care of? And do they need to come in and give us the report of ESG, how it's even benefiting the business? Not only how we are mitigating the cost, how it's benefiting the business. If they are not able to really quantify how it's benefiting the business, that's where you get a lot of pushback from people who see that this is a waste of our money. And it's the same with any sort of framework that is being implemented in a business, not only ESG. All right. So let's look at some opportunities that ESG risk provide for businesses. And when we talk about this, we are looking at the fact that it helps you grow from your current proposition, right? And then it gives you the availability to come up with new products and services. You can also be creating some even new industries that are coming out of this. So if this new industry, you need to look at what are the implications of these new industries on your business model that you have currently? Do you have to alter your business model completely? As I cited the example of a printing press, maybe for a printing press, you might have to alter the business model to become more of something else than just printing papers. Right? Maybe you have to go more into the design, more into the graphics, because people will need this support since a lot of things are becoming more and people are not printing hard copies. So the business model will be slowly changing. And then by the time you reach the end of your long-term strategy, which could be 5 years or 10 years, you realize that the business that you started with has completely changed. What you were known for before is no longer what you're known for today. And you realize that if you hadn't used your strategy as the means to ESG risk management, you would have found yourself wanting. Because by today, nobody would have printed and then your business will not be profitable. And what will happen is bankruptcy and any of these other issues that happens. Now, whilst there are these opportunities, there are a lot of challenges that comes with incorporating ESG. Most of this we know, data being number one, having the right people with expertise, especially when it comes to climate modeling and scope 3 accounting. Now, another compelling reason, I should say, why you need sustainability officers with the right knowledge, because this is not expertise that maybe some risk people would have already, but besides them, no other person in the business might be having this to begin with. There are issues of what is really sustainable. And then integrating within your corporate strategy, who is owning it up, and then the reporting and all that. All these are challenges. The first step that most businesses tend to use to manage this is go with an ISO certification. It's important to clarify that today there is no single ISO standard that guarantees ESG compliance, because ESG is more of a broad framework. However, there are ISO standards that provide strong foundation for implementing many aspects of the ESG strategy. So people would argue that, oh, there's the 14,001. Now, the whole 14,000 suite is for environmental management systems. So environmental, not social. If you go to the social, you might find ISO 45,001, which is on occupational health and safety and all that. You might find 31,000 for ERM also. So it's more about bringing all these together, finding the similarities. What are the right things that we are supposed to do? And the basic answer that I give to people is ESG is all about doing the right thing. If you set out to do the right thing in every aspect of your business, you realize that you're complying with most of the regulations, regardless of where your business extends to, which jurisdiction. You go and you find that, okay, maybe you just need to make more disclosures on this. Maybe you need to have a framework that is documented on this because you're already doing the right thing, right? So achieving the certification it's one part, but it's what makes it more important for me from the risk perspective is that you see, when you have an ISO certification, it comes to third-party audits, which verifies the systems that are in place to mitigate this particular thing. So if we take the 14,000, which is the environmental management system, what it tends to do is that every year on year, you have third parties who come and review the environmental management systems that you have in place, how you're managing climate, how you are, even your third party, your supplier, your third scope 3, emissions that's coming from them, how you're managing all that and all. It will be coming at a third party will be reviewing, and then all the gaps, they'll be identifying the gaps for you. So these gaps will become something that risk will take on board and then say, okay, let's find right controls to close these gaps. And this will be helping. So the certification for sure, it acts as a credible signal to stakeholders, but it's not the be it all of ESG risk management. It's a good starting point, but it's not a be it all. You need to be deliberate. Now, still under the strategy aspect of embedding ESG within your strategy, how do you create value from ESG? It's very important. You have to prioritize some ESG key themes. I keep mentioning how materiality is important. You can't do everything with one strategy. So you need to start from somewhere. So maybe now this year, you're trying to grow from your current propositions. Now, how do you go about this? We've provided the information here. You have to generate further results from the existing business. And then the example we gave here is that if you have any if you are an energy company, you need to start looking at climate transitioning for yourself. First of all, even before the product that you're coming up with. Because for energy companies, the sources that you generate this energy from, most of them are going to be stranded, what we call asset stranded from a climate risk. So you need to start looking at how you're going to transition. And this applies to every other business. You look at your current proposition, your current business operating model, and look at how you're going to transition from some aspects of it that are not so ESG compliant. Now, you look at expanding your proposition with new products. And then for this too, the example we've given at is look at how you're going to use insurance contracts to help yourself going through some voluntary carbon offsets, just to be able to show a very good risk management for, especially when it comes to the environmental aspect of things, right? Now, new industries and the new business models, you have to look at the analytics, look at how the customer preference is changing. This is most of the social factors, and look at how you're meeting the customer preference. The funny thing about this is you are mitigating a risk, but you're also doing the right business when you get to the fourth aspect, which is deriving new business models. So whilst you're mitigating the risk from the data that you have, you are creating new business. And then sometimes this new business will tend to become the new normal, because that's where people have transitioned from. So we are going to delve deeper within the next 10 to 12 minutes into how we can effectively manage ESG risk. And I would like to lead that with a video from Risk Minds, which queried a lot of risk managers about how they perceive this risk and the impact and how to manage it in the first place. And that will lead us with the discussion that we'll be having on that. So it's only a 2-minute video, so I would plead that we all pay attention and pick up a thing or two from the video. So you see, the proactive management of ESG risk should be the key component of any ESG strategy that you have in place, right? So it should be a key part of any ESG strategy that you have. And a lot of standards today are focusing on the risk identification and then the mitigation. So if you look at the ISO 37001 on anti-bribery management systems, it helps you to identify and address the bribery risk, which can have significant financial and reputational consequences. Or even the OHSC one that I spoke about, it also looks at the risk assessment. So it tells you that managing your ESG risk starts, first of all, from the risk perspective first. It starts from identifying the risk and then assessing the quantity of the risk that is affecting you. So I've been speaking about ISOs, but then it's not only about ISOs. There's a lot of other standards that can be equally beneficial to the business. Okay. So let's look at what the details of the ISO standards are and how you can even leverage that to benefit yourself. Okay. And we'll compare this against leading ones ERM frameworks like the COSO 2017 ERM framework. The reason why I keep going back to some of these standards is that they provide more of a structured approach. Now, with every business, your risk management should not be more of a siloed thing. It needs to be more structured. You need to have a framework around it. And having the right framework in place leads to about 70% mitigation of every form of risk to begin with. So if you already go by the ISO standards for ERM framework, then you can embed the ESG aspect into this. Now, if you look at what we have on this screen for now, let me close this because it's distracting us. For now, you see the process, and the process starts from assessing the risk. And under the assessing of the risk, you realize that you need to go through the risk identification and then the risk analysis. So the risk analysis is where we'll be talking about the materiality, which risks are more material to your business, how do you even determine them? And then there's two ways. The first way is, are they financially material to you, which is important for investors, especially the investors who are already pushing back on ESG activities. So you need to quantify it and evaluate it from that perspective for them. Now you need to look at it from the perspective of communicating and then consultation. So having the right people with the right knowledge to provide the mitigation for all the ESG risks that you identify. That's why I said, in some cases, you might have to go to HR. They have the right expertise for the particular maybe social risk that we are dealing with, maybe creating the right employee well-being. And they will be the best people to advise on what strategies specifically should you include to make the business more robust against this particular ESG risk or ESG factor. Then there should be monitoring and review, which is a big part of every risk management framework. If you compare this framework against the KPMG, our own risk management framework, you realize that there's a key emphasis on leadership, because anything that has the right governance, anything that gets monitored, it gets done. So having the right leadership commitment for this is going to go a long way to mitigate the particular risk that you have to deal with, right? Now, there needs to be some focus on cultural factors. And when we talk about cultural factors within the ESG context, you're going to look at it from two perspectives. The first one is organizational culture. The organizational culture is important because that determines whether any control you're putting in place would work or not. In some organizations, whatever control you bring will fail because there's so much collusion and people are colluding not to do the right thing, but to do the bad things. So you need to look at the factor and look at ways to get the right factor to operate. Now, you always need to look at risk management from a continuous perspective. It's not something that you say, I have managed the risk, so I'm okay. It's something that there needs to be monitoring around so that it becomes a continuous thing. That's why I was saying that having the certification sometimes is good because of the need for continuous assessment. And this continuous assessment sometimes will verify that you have everything right. In some cases, it will tell you these are the gaps. So close it before we certify you again. And it's good for you. So this you can include all these aspects as part of your ERM framework. And it's the same to the COSO 2017 ERM framework too. It also has governance and culture as an element. It looks at strategy, looks at performance, and it lists some of these things that we are talking about here. So as a business, how do you go about this? You look at it from the governance perspective, look at all the regulations that you have. Now, with this section, we are trying to make it as practical as possible. We were talking about frameworks and all, which could be a bit technical to understand. But practically, look at all the regulations that you're exposed to, and look at all the issues that you have with in relation to your stakeholder interest and their expectations on you. Once you look at this, define the right governance that suits this. Before we even go to strategy and performance, what you're going to do to incorporate this into your strategy and all, you need to define the right governance system that suits you, and then that suits the expectation that could deliver the result, not that they are just there to, and people will say, oh, we are part of the ESG committee, but ESG management committee, but there's nothing really that they are tasked with, or they are not even, they're just there in name and not really putting in any form of work, right? So you need to understand the social and environmental impact of issues that you're dealing with. Position the business in the market and seize business opportunities. This is also important, especially when you have to deal with, what do we call it? The strategy aspect of it. And then ensure that all international standards that you're being exposed to, you're managing. So we start first of all from the regulatory aspect, the regulatory standards that you have to deal with here, and then the international standards, because that will be best practice for you. Maybe for now, you don't have any business with any European company, but still look at the EFRS. See, what are some factors that have an impact on your business? And if it will not come at a very high cost for you, start in mitigating those risks now. Because tomorrow, if you have any partner from Europe, they are going to have this expectation of you. And it's going to be something that you now have to spend more to implement. So if you're being proactive, we think that it's in the right state. Okay. Now, these are some questions that we can leave with you that you ask yourself whilst you go through your developing strategy. And strategy goes through the 9 levers, and you can use this to answer to help yourself. But defining the direction is what really matters to me. Defining what risk management mean to your business and what a resilient strategy is. So if you're a bank, for instance, or you come from a financial asset management sector, you need to be clear about the future position of your bank, where you want it to be, right? If you set where you want the business to be, identify the client segments that you want to play mostly with. Now, when you identify that, it will be easier for you to determine the appropriate governance. Now, building the structures would follow suit. And you design the right structures that will be able to meet that particular market that you're dealing with. Then you go into designing the ERM framework, which is the bread and butter of what we are talking about. So the ERM framework, if you don't have one, or you're not able to, you can just go with the COSO ERM framework and try to, because the COSO ERM framework comes with principles. So you can adopt the principles to suit your need. All right. So the part of the ERM, every good ERM framework should have an aspect of governance. And when we talk about governance, we are no longer just talking about board members and all. We are talking about risk governance. What is the governance around the risks of ESG? Are there the right policies? Are there the right documentation in terms of framework? Are we even identifying the right ESG risks? Now you need to have an inventory of ESG factors that you consider as material to you, and those that are not even in your materiality context today, but you foresee them becoming part of your materiality context within the next 5 to maybe 10 years. And then you start mitigating them. Then the assessment bit is more technical. You have to quantify them. When it goes to climate risks, that's where the modeling and all this somehow technical, you might need an expert to help you part comes in. But with the social aspect, it's relatively easier to quantify how much it can impact your business. And then look at having the right tools, the right processes. In some cases, when we talk about tools, people think of big systems. Yes, having big systems are good and they will help you manage some of these risks. But sometimes just augmenting your process in another way. Having a small policy that we do not do. For instance, you can even have a simple quota on printing that every month people just print only 100 pages or 50 pages per person, and you realize that you would have helped with some aspects of your recycling because the number of paper waste that you're churning out would reduce. That's part of resource efficiency. That's also part of, which could all be some environmental factors that are more material to you. So you need to look at it holistically from that perspective. And then burden yourself with reporting. If you do not burden yourself with reporting today, the regulations are going to make it compulsory for you tomorrow. So you have to start thinking about reporting. The reason I say burden yourself with reporting is because it pushes you to do the right thing at all times, because you know that at the end of the year, you would need some good numbers to report, because nobody wants to put out a report that makes them look very bad. Meanwhile, that's the truth. But so if you know you don't want to look very bad, you'll be doing the right things and then be mitigating these ESG risk drivers. And somehow it will also be transmitting to the other known risk, your other known risk going down. So then we'll delve a bit deeper into integrating ESG risk into governance. And the first part is ownership. And when we talk about ownership, then it needs to start from the board. There should be some committee that's owning up to it. The board itself needs to be committed for you to say that you have the right risk governance. And then in that case, there need to be people as part of executives who become responsible for ESG, even if there is an ESG compliance officer or ESG, whatever name you give to them, there still needs to be somebody at the executive level. Maybe the CEO himself or the CFO or the CRO is accountable for it. And then they're accountable for the risk that comes with ESG. That helps with the ESG risk in governance. Now, incentivizing people also helps a lot. I mean, especially when we achieve some, as a business, when you achieve some ESG feat, incentivizing the whole workforce would ensure that the entire workforce come together. And then the same way we have collusion working against controls, when they all come together to work for controls, it becomes better than having any one person or department working to do it. Having the right reporting lines and giving the person or whoever is entrusted with ESG, especially if you have a management committee with the right authority to query people who are not following the policies, also help in mitigating most of the ESG risk that businesses face, especially with the ones within, or we call them inside out risk, the risk that the business is producing to the environment and not the ones that the environment is producing to the business. Okay, so when it goes to the risk identification and materiality assessment, we'll start with the governance risk. And you have to, first of all, look at your tax laws. That's the first part that you can be easily caught with. Look at all the exposures that you have in there. For that, businesses, I'm sure businesses from UK GCC are already complying with their tax issues. But I mean, going forward, there's going to be a lot of taxes and all that legislation that will be coming, being driven by ESG factors. So we need to keep a lookout on them. Then corruption, bribery attempts. We live in Ghana. We need to always look into that sector when you're doing your risk identification. Look for senior management compensation schemes. This is more with the governance aspect, so they would come up, right? Just, I'm not saying go and disclose right now, but at least for the risk identification, to identify how much of a risk it's posing to you. Then look at data protection, data issues around that. It's also very important and it comes up. Then when you go to the environmental aspect, now look at physical risk of climate, which is the consequence of climate change, the direct physical consequence of the climate change on your business. Look at it from that perspective. In terms of extreme weather events like tornadoes don't happen in this part of the world often. Earthquakes do happen. Do you have businesses or do you have partners, suppliers who happen to be in places that are earthquake prone? What are you doing around it? I think the Ramsey site, is your business around that area, or do you have assets around that area? And what is the business own approach to it? Once you identify the risk, you start mitigating it from that perspective to ensure that, okay, before the climate risk drives through the channels and becomes and crystallizes, you would have mitigated it already. Now look at it from transition perspective. Which laws are coming up? You should at least have what we typically call a center of excellence that is looking into news, looking into doing research to find out which legislation are coming. This is for businesses that are matured. I don't expect SMEs to have this, but for matured businesses, doing research to identify, just so you could be able to identify transition risk before they even crystallize. So the business does not have stranded assets or stranded investments. Because if you make investments and then the legislation that is being made to protect climate action makes it, what's the right word? Inoperable today. Like you cannot operate it today because it comes at a higher cost. Then most of this higher cost is compliance, or it's been dislawed, or it's been taken out of a law. It's now become against the law. Then you're going to lose a big chunk of your the amount on your books, because this asset you have committed resources to, and you're expecting it to generate more returns within maybe the next 5 to 10 years. But within 3 years, there's a regulation that requires that this asset becomes stranded. You find a way to sell it, and you will not get a good person to sell to, so it will become scrap. Then there's the social risks that we are very much aware of: payment of your labor, compliance with labor standards, and all. These are areas that you can look into to identify your risk. When you identify your risk, you look at the impact of this risk on your books in terms of financial, and the impact of this risk, how much they matter to the stakeholders that you think matters to you. For stakeholder identification, I think that's something we already know. So the stakeholders that you know matter to you, this is a way that you're doing the ESG risk identification and assessing your impact as part of it too. Okay. So I think I've spoken about most of this, and even with the materiality assessment process too, I've spoken to it too. So the last part that I will be ending with is the prioritization and mitigation strategies. So with the mitigation strategy, the first part is prioritizing which of the ESG risks matter to you today. As I've been saying, you cannot deal with everything today. If you tend to do that, you're going to commit a lot of the business resources to ESG things that a lot of people cannot see how they matter, because today they seem very remote and very far away. So prioritize, find the most important ones, especially per your resources, and create an action plan and then a roadmap. This roadmap needs to come with KRIs, risk indicators, that shows that these risks are going down or they are going up. They need to be smart in a way that you could be able to measure. And then you should not only have the focus on risk, you should also look at the opportunities. That's one issue I have with a lot of risk managers. They tend to be doomsayers, looking at all the bad things that could happen, and if it happens, we will no longer be here and all that. What are the good things too? And what should we do to ensure that we can get the benefits out of the good things that's coming out of it? The rest is on monitoring and reporting, and I think that's it for now. The rest, you monitor, you report to the necessary channels, be it the board committee, be it the management committee, different people who are tasked with different things. Maybe you task project zero to the risk manager. Sorry, you task net zero to your risk manager. He needs to come and give information on how the business is proceeding. Are you going to meet all the targets you set for yourself? If not, how is he ensuring that the business will get back on track, right? All these things need to be embedded as part of your monitoring and reporting. And then you communicate right. Then you're seen to be doing a very good ESG risk management and ensuring that they do not transmit to have negative impact on your bottom line. So Emma, is there a question?
Yes, Benan, there is. So maybe to finalize on this wonderful presentation, he's asking, can you go through the questions that we need to consider in assessing ESG in your previous slide? So we can go through the questions so we can tie this wonderful presentation together.
Okay, sure. It was the questions that are part of to inform your strategy, right? Okay, so the first part is, do you want to be an ESG leader? Do you want to be a follower, or you just want to meet requirements? Now, this goes back to the ambition setting that we dealt with in the introductory slides. If you look at ambition setting, you can either choose ESG as a compliance tool, you can choose ESG as a strategic imperative, or ESG as more of a transformation for your business. So if you're trying to become a leader, then you should be going with a transformation mindset and not looking at it from the perspective of, what are our risks? What are the regulations that we have to meet? okay, I mean, they said we should do reporting, so let's find some guy who can do the reporting for us and go away with it. This leads me to a very funny revelation that came up not so long ago, that businesses are spending more on sustainability reporting than actual sustainable impact. And the answers that business leaders give is that sustainability reporting is mandatory. The impact is not mandatory. You choose whether to do it or not. So it all goes back to what the ambition of the business is. Now, the second part is, which market segments are you choosing to play with? What are the challenges within your current setting that you have? Are there any expectations of your clients, your suppliers, your distribution, and all that? Your supply chain, are there any expectation? We've spoken about most of this. You need to bring this back into your materiality assessment, right? Now, do you have the needed infrastructure and capabilities? If not, what is going to be the resource requirements? Now, this needs to be quantified when you're talking about infrastructure and capabilities, because you're going to be requesting for money from people who will need actual data to be able to support it. Okay, so do you have the right governance to protect the investments that you're going to make, to ensure that, in fact, the investment will be monitored right, and then you achieve the impact that is expected, right? Do you have the right leadership and culture in place to support it? Because there are some things that, even diversity and inclusion, there are some organizational cultures that if you try to bring it today, tomorrow you will fail, because of some mindsets and some setups that are in the office. It makes it very difficult to break through some of these channels. So you need to look at it from that perspective. Another thing that I haven't mentioned or haven't said much about is change management. Whilst you're managing the risk, you should also be looking at change management, especially when some aspect of your operation model is changing and your business model is changing. People need to find out that when people find out that there's going to be change, they need to be brought on side. They need to be explained to. They need to be trained and understand how this helps all of us. If not, they are going to be threatened by it, and then they are going to break down this. So I think, Emma, for me, we have gone through the questions that are supposed to influence the strategy that you're putting in place. So
Great, Bernard. Thank you very much. And this was a very, very insightful session. And the approach was to have it blended. So we had our questions as we had our speaker also share their thoughts. I think there's a question here I also want to quickly answer to. Will the training be uploaded? Yes. So the UK Ghana Chamber of Commerce social handle on YouTube, the recording of the webinar will be published on there, so we can keep the conversation moving or going on there as well. And so I want to say a big thank you to the UK Ghana Chamber of Commerce, to you, our wonderful audience and participants, for joining this webinar. Based on the things that we've heard and we've understood, we've gleaned a lot of information from understanding ESG risk and how they can enhance our existing risk management frameworks, how integration of these ESGs into our corporate strategies and governance would be a good lever for our competitive advantage. And finally, the strategies for addressing each of these ESG risks. And so I'm thankful for your time, and I wish you all a very good day. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Thank you, Emma. Goodbye.